Okay, hello, Classical Archives audience. This is Barry Lenson with the Classical Archives video blog, and today it's my great pleasure to welcome Katie Mahan, whose beautiful new album, Heaven and Hell, has just been released on the Steinway album. So we're absolutely delighted to be able to talk to her and bring to you her views about this terrific album and tell us more about herself and whatever else she would like to talk about. So, the first thing I'd like to ask is, um, what was the thinking behind Heaven and Hell as an album? Again, it's on the Steinway label. What thinking went behind it? You also, I guess I should ask, you have other albums that I've had the privilege of listening to as well. This is the first one on Steinway, is that right? Or have you done
This
others?
is actually my fifth album on Steinway.
Oh, excuse me.
The first one was an all Gershwin album. It's called Classical Gershwin, and that features my own arrangements of Rhapsody in Blue, Second Rhapsody, and a selection of songs. And my second album is Appassionata, and that's an all Beethoven album that has the Appassionata, Opus 109, and the wonderful Bagatelles, Opus 126. And then I had Once Upon a Time, which features the Liszt Piano Sonata in B minor and works of Mozart, including the A minor sonata, and the fantastic Fantasy and Fugue in C major of Mozart. And then last year I had a release called Mozart Live on Stereo, and that was a really unique recording because the entire album was recorded not for microphone, but actually directly into the Steinway Stereo player piano. So that's a very unique recording process. And then now this is my fifth album. Now you ask about the idea behind the album. I kind of wanted to trace the influence between Mozart and Beethoven. And so the reason that I started with Don Giovanni, my own arrangement to the overture, is because there is the wonderful story that the Moonlight Sonata is not actually based upon the concept of a romantic scene in which moonlight is reflecting on Lake Lucerne. That was actually an idea that was put forth by a man who was considered the first great music critic in the German-speaking world. His name was Ludwig Rellstab. And he, in 1824, he had written an article for a Berlin Zeitung in which he said that the Moonlight Sonata reminded him of this beautiful idea of moonlight reflecting on the lake in Lucerne and having this beautiful backdrop. And it's possible that Beethoven actually knew of this, but what is for sure is that Beethoven himself did not call it the Moonlight Sonata. And what's very interesting is that in the early turn of the last century, the wonderful Swiss pianist Edwin Fischer discovered a manuscript in the archives of the Musikverein in Vienna in which Beethoven had copied out the scene from Mozart's opera Don Giovanni in which Don Giovanni kills the commendatore. And not only did Beethoven copy this out, but he transposed it from Mozart's original key of C minor up to C sharp minor. And furthermore, it has been dated to just before the composition of the Moonlight Sonata. Therefore, there is a great possibility that Don Giovanni in this particular scene was the background for the Moonlight Sonata. And to me, it just makes the entire piece come alive because the whole story, I think you can go from beginning to end. You know, in the first movement, we're looking back on Don Giovanni almost as if in a dream. And it makes sense also, or it provides a possible explanation for Beethoven's very unusual marking on this movement that the entire movement should be played senza sordino with the damper pedal down the entire time. And when you do that, it has an incredible blurring of harmonies. And I think it's unfortunate that this is a marking that's often ignored. It's ignored with the argument that, well, Beethoven's piano was very different and you can't do it on the modern piano. And I don't see why. I mean, the modern piano is able to do so many wonderful things. And, we as interpreters try so hard to be faithful to the composer, so I think it's important to observe what Beethoven wrote, and so to me, when I can take the story of Don Giovanni and perhaps that Beethoven is looking back on Mozart as in a dream, then the whole idea of this long pedal and blurred harmony makes sense. And then as you go through the sonata and you get to the last movement, and it's just this story of Don Giovanni and the whole flames of hell and all the drama of the opera really comes to life. So that was kind of the genesis of the idea here, with tracing the connection between Beethoven and Mozart, starting with that particular sonata.
Okay, that's fabulous. Thanks. Yeah, it's fabulous to you. No, I was unaware of any of that about the Moonlight Sonata and that history. So thanks so much for that. Um, about transcriptions, I have to ask. I know that if we go back to Liszt, he often played his own transcriptions on recitals alongside his own original compositions, and I assume
Mm-hmm.
other composers' works as well.
Right.
Um, has it become less common for people to intermix transcriptions with other works on recitals, or is it still being done regularly? I just don't know.
Um, I think it is being done, but I think probably you see much more frequently recitals of the repertoire that's as is, and I think that's probably because we have such a wealth of repertoire over the last 400 years, and it's not maybe necessary to do your own transcriptions. But on the other hand, I personally find it very rewarding. I find it's enjoyable for me because I think the piano it's an incredible instrument. It has so many wonderful the ability to capture so many aspects of orchestral music or even operatic music. And I think also it opens up possibilities to present this repertoire sometimes to people who perhaps don't go to an orchestra concert or don't go to the opera, and yet they can still hear this amazing music, played on the piano. And I think it's not something that you have to think, well, that's nice, but because, when a piano is playing it, it's going to be different by nature, from the original version, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worse. It's just different.
Right. Years ago, I worked at Manhattan School of Music for a while, and one of the people who was on faculty was Earl Wild, and he was
Hmm.
a
Yes.
big champion of transcriptions.
Yeah.
So
And fabulous transcriptions he did.
yeah, yeah. How do you approach writing a transcription of another work? Do you start with the orchestral score? Do you rely on your ears? Is it a mixture of different things that you do?
I would say it's a mixture of both, but the thing that I always try to put the emphasis on is listening to exactly which voices and which parts of every single section have to be there above all, because obviously it's not possible to put every single thing in as a pianist with only 10 fingers, and so you have to pick and choose by nature. And the only thing that can tell you at that beginning point what is absolutely essential and what is not essential is your ear, and so I go through and do it by ear, and then of course I look at the score, um, and transcribe from there.
Are there any works that you're dying or planning to do transcriptions of in the future, if you don't
Yes.
mind giving people a glimpse of what might come?
Yes, I would love to do a piano transcription of Mozart's Requiem. And I have done several movements of it so far, but I have not done I would like to complete the completed movements that are in existence. So that's a project for down the road when I have time.
That's fabulous. No, certainly look forward to that. I wanted to ask you also about where you're from and who you studied with and just your general background. Because
Mhm.
I know our listeners will be interested in knowing about that.
Well, my first teacher was my mother. She taught me from the time I was 4 until I was 18. And I must say, I grew up in a household of music. You know, my mom was obviously a piano teacher, and she had already wanted to start teaching me piano at 2 or 3. And, you know, I wasn't terribly interested. However, my parents always took me to concerts, and my real first memory of live music was attending the Santa Fe Opera. We went to see the Magic Flute, and I was 2 years old. And to this day, I can still remember some aspects. I can remember the way that the Queen of the Night came out of the sky and descended down to the stage. You know, that was really my first memory of music. And but then when I was 4 years old, my parents took me to a concert of Katy and Marielle Lebec. They were performing in Denver. And after that concert, I told my mom that's what I want to do. And so I started piano the next day.
Wow.
And so my mom she was a wonderful teacher for me because I had very strong opinions on what I wanted to play and how I wanted to play. And she worked with me rather than forcing me to do repertoire that I maybe didn't want to do. And, you know, she allowed me to go through the various phases of my interests. And for instance, I had during my childhood, there was probably 5 or 6 years that I played literally nothing but Bach. And that was the great love of my life. And, you know, I think I credit my mother for allowing me to discover very large amounts of repertoire and work on very large amounts of repertoire. And it's also, I think Bach is a wonderful composer to build your technique, to build your thinking between left hand, right hand, to think, you know, in really complex ways. And so, you know, I think I'm very grateful to my mother for allowing me to choose this repertoire, you know. And after that, I had a period where I played a lot of, I mean, early on, I played a lot of Mozart, and then played a lot of French repertoire, and then I developed a love for Gershwin. And so I would say it gave me, um, I had a very broad repertoire and very broad interests. And during that time, I also had a mentor. His name was Howard Waltz, and he had been my mother's teacher, and he studied with Robert and Gabi Katsatsu. And so um, I learned a lot about the French style of playing and an understanding of French music. And because of my interest in French music, then I eventually studied with Pascal Roger, and that was wonderful. I spent a few years really dedicated to Debussy, and so I studied more or less the complete piano works of Debussy with Pascal Roger, and that was wonderful because French music teaches you to listen in a special way, to listen for colors, to listen for subtleties, and I think I try and bring uh, that I learned from studying French music to other repertoire, and I think it's very important, specifically with Viennese classical music. You know, these are techniques that are very applicable.
So at a certain point, did you shuttle off to conservatory somewhere or university?
I studied at the University of Colorado. I I got a scholarship there that I couldn't pass up. So it
Okay.
was, and then after that, I studied privately. So
And now have found your way to Salzburg. So
that's right.
and you're living there. So how did that come to happen?
Well, you know, my very first trip to that area was when I was 8 years old. My parents took me on a we went on a trip to Europe. My parents had lived in Europe before I was born, and so we went more or less every year. But the first time I went to Austria and Bavaria, I was 8 years old, and you know, you see this place. We visited the royal castles in Bavaria. We saw this incredible landscape. We visited the Mozart house in Salzburg, you know, and I told my parents that's where I would that's where I'm going to live one day, you know. And by chance, it has happened, and you know, I love living there. I love being able to live in the middle of this history and to imagine that I'm walking down the same streets that Mozart walked down one a long time ago. You know, for me, it's very inspiring because I think for every composer is influenced by where he comes from. His music his personality and his background influences art very much. And in order to understand a composer, or to try to understand a composer, I think you have to make the effort to understand the place they came from, the culture of that place. And without doing that, it's very difficult to really understand the music, I think.
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. In May, for the first time, my wife and I went to Berlin.
Hmm.
And I've been working on a writing project with a fantastic German opera singer named Falk Struckmann, who was singing in The Flying Dutchman
Hmm.
at the Staatsoper. And it was just something, again, about just being there and, being in an opera house that had such a history of
Yeah.
such stuff.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get around the additional emotional impact of it all.
Yeah.
So I agree. So can I ask a question? And again, you feel free to reject or amplify or change anything I ask, but how do you always, even when you're playing very complex, thick, textured music, always manage to get such a beautiful sound? Is there a secret to that, or is it just flow from you as an artist? Or again, if it's not a question that makes any sense, let me know.
Well, I think possibly it goes back to my study of French music, because French music is all about, like I said, colors, subtlety, degrees of dynamics, such subtle degrees of dynamics, and a type of gentleness and elegance, never a percussive attack. And I think that this idea carries over to every repertoire. And also, when I play a piece of music, every piece of music I play, I have an image in my head of something. I have a story for that piece. And I think, for instance, when I'm playing Brahms, I see a beautiful landscape in which you have all of these shades of green, delicate hills and mountains. And this, to me, it has to have a warmth of tone. You can't have a cruelty of tone. You have the warmth and the beauty of the natural world. And so I try to render that kind of an idea into the touch of the music,
It's
if
fascinating.
that makes sense. So
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. When I was in graduate school, I was studying singing with Phyllis Curtin, who was kind of a famous soprano. And for like every song that you sang, she urged you to create a visual world, kind of like what you're talking about, an actual, like if you're singing one of the Duparc Baudelaire songs, an actual, know where everything is, know if there's water dripping, you know what it is, know what it smells like, know everything about it. So
yeah,
it's interesting. So you're talking about what you just spoke about makes me think about that too, building a sensory world and kind of stepping into it.
yeah.
So
Well, I mean, that's what music is. Let's face it, music is a reflection of life. You can't divorce music from the natural world. That's part of what it is. And so I think it's very important to think in those terms as a musician, you know.
yeah, that's terrific. So I just have a few questions, and then of course I'll invite you to talk about anything you want to talk about. But what's coming up next for you in terms of new performances and new recordings? What can our listeners look forward to from you?
So I have a new album that will come out this winter, and it'll be a double disc set of a Mozart, which is including a chamber music program, two piano concertos, the concerto in D minor, number 20, and in C major, opus 25, arranged for piano and string quintet by the German composer Ignaz Lachner. And it's an absolutely wonderful, the arrangements are just fantastic and really
Wow.
never heard. I think there's one recording in existence, perhaps. And I did that with the Mozarteum Quartet. And so that will come out probably in January or February, and then along with it, there's a solo program also of Mozart. So
Fabulous. Really. Did I read somewhere that some of your concert apparel was designed by your mother? Did I read that in one of your things?
yes, you did. My mother
Yeah.
designs almost all of my concert gowns. She's an incredibly talented woman. Not only as a musician, she's a painter, and she's a wonderful fashion designer. So, and she actually started doing that because years ago I had a concert in the middle of the winter in Holland in a church that was completely unheated.
Oh boy.
It was so cold, my hands would hardly work, and so I told my mom, I said, we have to come up with something that's still elegant and young looking, but keeps me warm. And so that's kind of why she started designing my gowns, to create beautiful, attractive clothes, but still that are warm enough so that I'm not injuring my arms in these cold places.
Yeah, well, I'd really encourage our listeners to look at some of your videos that are on YouTube because it's you really always look spectacularly dressed and it's just
Thank you.
wonderful. You mentioned your dad before as being
Yes.
so both your parents still contributing to your artistic stuff and things like that.
Yeah, my dad, he unfortunately passed away a little less than a year ago,
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
he was certainly one of my greatest fans, and my first manager. Actually, he worked on getting me my first concerts, but his profession, he was a solar physicist, and
Wow.
so he developed solar cells and did the research behind them.
Wow. That's some family you've got. Have you got siblings also?
I do. I have a brother, and he lives in New York City.
Oh, wow. Okay. Terrific. Are you plans to come back to New York City to do a concert by any chance?
At the moment, I don't have any concerts coming up in New York this season, but hopefully next season.
Okay. And people, if they want to see what you're doing, should go to your website.
Yes.
Okay. Terrific. So is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
So I guess I would encourage your listeners and viewers to check out some of my music videos. In many of my videos, I try to really bring the history behind certain pieces of music to life. I did a video of Rhapsody in Blue that was filmed in New York. And, I think the story behind Rhapsody in Blue is so interesting. The way Gershwin wrote it on a train ride between Boston and New York and really made it as a portrait to New York City. And so I've tried to bring this story to life in my arrangement. And I have done similar videos also I did one of Beethoven's Appassionata, in which I actually filmed in places in Vienna where Beethoven had lived, and also in the Wienerwald, where he had gone for long walks. And so it kind of it gives a glimpse of Beethoven's world and, the places that he went for inspiration. And I have another video of a part of the Liszt Sonata in which I visited the Liszt house where he was born in Riding in far East Austria. And so those are things that are, I've really enjoyed creating, and this is not videos that I create for promotion. These are videos that I create to try and help particularly younger audiences connect to classical music in a time when everything is so visually oriented. I think it's perhaps helpful for young people to be able to see the relevance of the music by understanding where the composers come from and a little bit where what's the history behind the music. And then another thing, I did a wonderful project with Colorado Public Radio in which I filmed 36 episodes, taking viewers all through Salzburg to the various places where Mozart lived, worked, had friends, and premiered certain works. And I think it was a fascinating project for me because in biographies, there's always a focus on Mozart in Vienna, and there's always the thing where Mozart said, "I hate Salzburg." Well, why did he hate Salzburg? And I think he really didn't. He was a man that traveled all over Europe, and he was loved by kings and queens. And then he had to come home, like we all have to do. And I think he felt underappreciated, but I don't think he really hated his hometown. And like every one of us, we're shaped by the place that we come from. And Mozart came from Salzburg, and I think it's responsible for many aspects of his personality. And it certainly contributed to his development as a composer. So that was a wonderful, wonderful project. And I invite your viewers to check out the videos
That's fabulous. And where can they find them again online?
on YouTube, and they're called Mozart Snapshots.
Okay,
36 episodes.
wonderful. Well, I know what I'm going to be doing this afternoon, so
Hope you enjoy.
be watching those.
Yeah.
So, well, tremendous. So unless there's something else you want to delve into, I think this is just wonderful. It's just been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much. And I think for the other recording that's perhaps interesting for your audiences is I did a recording back in 2018 of Bernstein's complete piano music, and
Right, right.
this is just great repertoire that is so underperformed and more or less unknown. And so I encourage people to listen, to check it out. It's charming, it's funny, it's sarcastic, it's wonderful repertoire, and really unjustly neglected.
Wonderful. Okay, let me just mention to our readers too that your new record, new release, Heaven and Hell, is available on Classical Archives. So of course, we'll put a link adjacent to this interview so people will be able to find it and listen. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have wonderful travels. And
Thank you.
okay, certainly look forward to following your progress and set our sights on that Mozart Requiem and all kinds of stuff.
Thank you very
Really,
much.
yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And again, thanks for being in touch with Classical Archives about this fabulous CD. So
Thank you
thank
for
you so
featuring
much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
you as well.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.